Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So I'm coming at you from a new place. I am in my new place. I've got my sewing stuff everywhere. We're going to do a video talking about sewing, storage, putting things away. I'll go through it. Let me know if you want to see that down below and we can put that together. My room behind the camera is a right mess with sewing stuff at the moment, but I'm excited to get started with the sewing again. So in today's video, I want to talk about autism and sewing. This might be a little bit niche for some of you, but you can think of it as neurodiversity and sewing. So on my carnivore channel last night, I published a video called My Autism Diagnosis Journey. And it's quite a long video, but it goes into a lot of detail about the fact that I have been diagnosed with autism and the process. So if you're interested in that, you can go and watch that. I'll link it down below. So in this video, obviously we're a sewing channel, so we're going to keep it relevant to sewing. So I've come up with some tips on, if you're autistic or neurodivergent, how to make your sewing experience a bit better. I actually went on a group on Facebook and asked their opinion, because I'm very new to this. Although I've been autistic all my life, I didn't know about it until a month ago. So I'm still in the reflecting stage and kind of learning what is autism and what is not. Just a note that all the tips I'm going to share with you won't apply to all of you with autism or neurodiversity, but pick and choose the things that resonate with you and you think are going to make your life a bit easier. So let's get into it without further ado. So the first one is to learn to adapt sewing patterns to your sensory needs. So I don't know about you, but sometimes when I feel a label in the back of my neck, it can be really, really annoying. So perhaps in that situation, then I wouldn't put labels in. And actually something I do is I always sew the seam of a collar right in the centre back so I can tell the front from the back, because I don't like to put labels in. If seams are bothersome for you, you could do French seams, which tend to be a little bit softer because it's all enclosed. You can do less seams. Sometimes I see patterns that have got a seam down the front or down the middle of the back. You could cut on the fold to avoid that. Pockets, if you like pockets, put them in. If you don't like pockets, leave them out. And also another biggie that came up was to make the clothes so they fit multiple sizes. So if you're someone who has a lot of bloating, you can make them to fit multiple sizes. So like a wraparound skirt, for example, or elasticated waist. There's just a few little ideas for sensory needs, but you know yourself best. If something bothers you in your clothing, then find a workaround for that. So the next one is to buy a quiet sewing machine or to use earplugs. So quite a few people come up and said they love sewing, but the noise is too much for them. For me personally, I would say the noise of the sewing machine hasn't bothered me unless it's quite jarring. Some of the early sewing machines I had were quite jarring, had a jarring sound to them. My more higher end machine is a lot quieter and I don't notice it. So if your machine is causing too many sound problems for you, then consider getting a quieter machine, or if you can handle it, put earplugs in or even noise cancelling headphones. Use clips to avoid poking yourself with needles. Now this is something really, really important to me because I have essential tremor. So anytime I use needles, my hand shakes and I end up stabbing myself. But when you've got autism and you stab yourself, it can feel really intense. You can use clips instead of pins, or you can actually learn to sew without any kind of attachment. Often what I ended up doing was just sewing without pins and without clips, because clips can be a little bit cumbersome. But if you need something, then clips are a really good one, or you can baste your seams as well. So the next one is to set your sewing machine to a slower speed if it goes too fast for you. I think this really applies when you're new to sewing, but sometimes when you're more accustomed to it as well. but the sewing machine can go really, really fast, can't it? If you buy a lower end sewing machine that doesn't come with different speeds, then you just have to adapt to the speed that you've got. But it's a bit like driving a car, where you've got to take your foot off the gas and on the gas to go slower and faster. It's kind of like that with the sewing machine foot as well. If you're new to this channel and you're into sewing, do hit subscribe, because we are gonna like rock it with the sewing very soon. I haven't been doing actual sewing on this channel for quite a while now, because I got overwhelmed a couple of years ago and walked away from it, but I've kept the channel going talking about sewing. But we are going to get back to some actual sewing very, very soon. So do hit that subscribe button. Leave me a comment to say hi down below. I feel that a lot of these tips are applicable to everyone, really. Neurodiverse and neurotypical. So stay with the video right till the end. So the next one is don't rush and take lots of breaks if you need to complete over multiple days. So we get this idea in our head that we want to make a dress or a top or trousers or whatever it is we want to make, and we've got to do it as fast as possible. And I've spoken about this in other videos, but we don't have to at all. You take it slow, you're going to enjoy the process a lot more. If you put pressure on yourself to go fast, then you are going to end up getting overwhelmed and overstimulated, and you're going to ruin the thing you're working on, and you're going to give up as well. So just take it slow. Do 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, half an hour here, half an hour there, whatever works for you, and you will really, really enjoy the process a lot more. So the next one is to read the pattern instructions a few days before you start your project. So in the group, when I was discussing this, a lot of people come up with saying they struggled with the instructions, absorbing them, taking them in, understanding what they say. These days, a lot of instructions are really good because they have text, but they have images to show as well. So always go for pattern companies that do that. For example, Style Arc don't do that. Well, last time I sewed, they didn't. It was just a list of text and it was brief. So I can imagine someone with autism, myself included, would struggle with that, and I did. If you really know sewing, then you'll probably be okay. Go with companies that will facilitate your understanding, basically. So they will give instructions, and often these companies produce videos as well, like sew-alongs and things. And even if it's not the company, it might just be another vlogger. Watch the sew-along before. So take the time, just take half an hour and slowly absorb it. Then when you're making your project, read each section bit by bit as you do it, and it will go in more easily because you've already absorbed it. Something else you can do is that if you struggle with patterns that other companies have produced, you can learn to draft your own. So this is something that will take time to understand, but there's lots of videos on YouTube where they explain how to make your own slopers. And once you make your own slopers, you can basically make any design you want. It is in my sewing life goals, if you like. I feel not only are you gonna have an easier time if you make your own and you understand your own slopers, but it's going to save you a lot of money as well. So the next one is to set an alarm on your phone in order to take regular breaks. When we are sewing, sometimes we can get so hyper-focused, so absorbed in the project that we're doing that we forget to take breaks, we forget to drink, we forget to eat, we forget to check in on the other family members. So when you're doing this, make sure that you set your alarm to take a break, because that will remind you to get refreshed, and you will feel better. You'll have less brain fog. You will just be able to glide through your project much more easily if you're getting refreshments. So the next tip is that if you struggle with fabrics, the texture, the feel of it, then buy your fabrics in a shop. Now this isn't always possible. I used to live on the Isle of Wight, and when I lived there, it was very difficult to get dressmaking fabrics. We did have one fabric shop called Hellacy, and they had a few dressmaking fabrics, but they were mainly for home sewing. And so I had to order online. So I would say, if possible, but go and buy in person. Go to the shop so you can feel the fabric, and that will give you a much better idea if you're going to cope with it on your body. If you have to order online, then always get a sample. You'll not only know the texture and the feel of it, but you'll know the quality of it, so you can make sure you're buying quality fabric. I'd say as a neurodivergent person, you want to avoid cheap polyester type fabrics. When I was first sewing, I would always buy cheap fabrics. I didn't have a lot of money, and if I could get fabric for £1 a metre, it was a good day for me. But what I found over time, apart from the fact that the fabric was rubbish and didn't last and fell apart in the machine, was it just didn't feel very nice, and I couldn't wear it. I stopped wearing polyester about 3 years ago now. So we talked earlier on about buying a quieter sewing machine if the noise is too much for you. If that's not an option for you and the noise is really bothersome, then perhaps try hand sewing. Quite a few of the ladies that commented on my post on Facebook said that they like to hand sew because it's a lot more soothing for them than a machine. For me personally, I don't like the idea of hand sewing. I don't know, it's just too slow for me, and with my hand tremors, it's not a good thing because you are going to get poked. If hand sewing appeals to you, consider that. One thing hand sewing is really good for is keeping your hands busy. So if you're someone who needs like a fidget toy in your hand, or to be doing something with your hands constantly, then hand sewing is really going to help you out because it will keep your hands occupied. There was someone in the group who talked about wanting to sew but was scared of making mistakes. So mistakes will happen. They are part of life. We cannot avoid making mistakes. When I started sewing, I made a lot of mistakes, but that was how I learned, and that's how I got better. So don't be afraid of the mistakes that you may make, because every mistake is experience, and experience is what's going to make you a better seamstress. So people with autism tend to have really good attention to detail, and they don't tend to be able to zoom out so easily. That's certainly the case with me. If you've been watching me for any length of time, you know I'm all the details. Not only in my sewing projects, when I've done sewing tutorials, I show a lot of detail, but also just in talking and everything else. You can use your attention to detail to help you make a real high-end garment. High-end garments take a lot of attention and detail, because you cannot just whiz a garment under the sewing machine without thinking much about it, doing it in under an hour, and produce a really high level garment. Maybe you can if you've been sewing for 30 or 40 years. But for most of us, we haven't, and so it's going to be very difficult to achieve that. Our attention to detail is a really good thing in this situation, because we are going to notice if our stitch line is wonky. We are going to notice if the fabric is fraying in a little spot. We are going to notice if maybe one of the buttonholes is off slightly. You know, all these little tiny details. When you take care to manage them and do that technique correctly, we are then going to have a really high-end garment that is going to last a long, long time. For some, creating a project or creating a garment as a project can seem overwhelming, overstimulating. There's so much to think about because the sewing is only a really tiny part of the whole project. So in that case, you might be thinking about wanting to make a dress, but you keep putting it off because there's so much to think about. In that case, I would say do it in sections, and that's going to reduce your overwhelm, and it's going to make the whole experience a lot more pleasurable. Have you hit that subscribe button yet? Come on, you know you want to. Also, what questions have you posed down below? Chat to everyone else in the comments, because we can all learn from each other. If you are autistic or neurodivergent, leave a comment down below and let us know what works for you in sewing. So the next one is to listen to an audiobook or put a video on to keep your brain engaged. For me, when I sew, I get hyper-focused and I get so into it, I can't think of anything else. And then I look up like an hour later and I'm like, it's so quiet in here. But I haven't realised. But if I had like a podcast on in the background, it would give me some background noise. It would make me feel not so alone, but it would also really just help the process. I can't think, process of, my brain's gone blank. The process of making a garment a lot quicker because your brain's elsewhere. But I actually like that I don't think of anything when I'm sewing, because my whole life is spent ruminating and thinking, overthinking, and things going round and round in my head again and again. So when I sew, it's really mindful. It really just takes me out of myself. But I will say, if you're going to put a video on, be super, super careful, because I did that one time. Turned round to see what was going on in the TV that was behind me and sewed through my finger. So do it with caution. This one's a biggie, and that is to sew one project at a time. When I got into sewing and when I started to get a bit more accomplished, I decided batch sewing was the way to go, especially on YouTube, because I had to have projects to show people. So if I could have multiples of the same thing, that would make a better video. But you might feel like doing batch sewing just to have more clothes. But I would err on the side of not doing that. I tried it once and it didn't really work out for me. So I cut out 4 lots of shirts for my husband. It was great. I started sewing them, but halfway through I got completely bored and stopped doing it. And I had to put real pressure on myself to complete them. But by the time I was completing the last bits on each section, I was just whizzing it through and not doing a really good job. So just do one project at a time, because you might get a bit too overwhelmed if you've got so much to think about. And it's not just batch sewing. You might be making a dress, but you took a break and now you're making a top or trousers or something else. If you think you can flip through between projects, think again. It won't happen, because what happens is you enjoy one project more than the other, so you will focus on that project, and then by the time you finish that project, the other project you've lost interest in. So just do one project at a time. It's not going to overwhelm you that way, and you are going to enjoy the process more. So the next thing is to buy good quality tools, and this will reduce your frustration. There's nothing worse than thinking you've got a great bargain, you've bought this tool, cheap as chips, £1.50 or $1.50 off Amazon, and you're doing it, but it's not doing the job very well. A good example of this is when I bought a magic foot. I keep calling it a magic foot. It's not a magic foot, it's a walking foot. I bought a walking foot off Amazon, cheap one. It was like about £9. And I used it and it worked, but the noise on it was horrific. It sounded like one of those old school trains coming. And like, it ended up giving me a really severe headache, and I was frustrated and I stopped using it. I then bought a high-end one, and it was close to silent, and it was so much better for me. And I ended up leaving that on my machine pretty much all of the time. So the next one is to pick your time to sew wisely. If you live with other people, it can be quite frustrating to want to sew and then people are in the way, or they're demanding your time for something else, or they might keep interrupting you. All these things can add frustrations and cause overwhelm. So pick your time wisely, maybe when other people are out of the house or after they've gone to bed. And then you're going to enjoy the process more because you have uninterrupted focus, which is really, really important, I think, for neurodivergent people. Now, I did touch on this earlier, but the next one is to watch sew-alongs of the project you're intending to make before you make it. This is so, so important, and that's why I'm mentioning it again, because you really need to understand the steps that you need to take to achieve what you're trying to do. And for me, it really depends if you're someone who works better with text or images. For me, I can read text and just not take it in, not absorb it at all. But if I see someone doing it, it just clicks in my head. And there's whatever pattern you're going to be making, there's probably a sew-along for it by someone. So the next one is to read your sewing machine handbook before you sew, in order to understand the limitations and the expectations you can have of your sewing machine. I think sometimes when we use technology, we can get really frustrated because the machine is not doing the thing that we want it to do. But there's probably an answer in the manual somewhere for anything that is not going your way. So if you have that understanding, if you've taken the time to sit and read the manual page to page, I know not many people will want to do that, but it will be really beneficial. Another thing that really, really gets my goat when I'm sewing is when I run out of bobbin. You know, I know you agree with me here. So make sure that you have loaded enough bobbins before you start your project, because nothing more frustrating than you having to stop what you're doing, take your project out of the machine and then go through the process of setting up the bobbin, loading it, then putting it in and then going again. You might lose your motivation or your momentum. The next one is to focus only on the step you're doing at the time you're doing it, and then you will be able to understand what is expected of you. You will do it correctly. You'll have less mistakes. So for me, I tend to think in all capacities, not just sewing, 3 steps ahead. So what am I doing down the road, even though I'm doing something else, which I'm doing on autopilot, but the thing, I'm doing this on autopilot because I was thinking of that 3 things ahead, if you know what I mean. So the problem is, when you're thinking 3 steps ahead, you're not giving this current step the focus and the attention that it needs. And you are going to end up really, really frustrated. Who here likes unpicking seams? Not me. Not me. So this one was another biggie for me, and that is to keep your sewing space tidy to avoid overwhelm. And this is something I didn't do. If you watch me back in the day, my space was a complete and utter chaotic mess. And in the end, I got so overwhelmed that I stopped sewing. And had I been able to keep it tidy, I would have not become overwhelmed, and my whole story might have been very different. But when I came back to sewing, as I briefly did last year before my marriage broke down, I made a concerted effort to tidy as I go. So not just let threads drop on the floor, or not just dump fabric over there, just put stuff away and keep the space tidy. And if it was a project over multiple days, then I would actually tidy at the end of each day. So the next thing you could do is to purchase a standing desk that you can have at the right height for you. So a few years ago, I got a standing desk. It was a brand deal actually, and it's been an amazing desk. I've had it a good 3 years now, and I love it. I wouldn't be without it, because when I am cutting out my patterns or my fabric, I don't have to be bending over. I can just be at the right height for me, and that's going to mean less pain. I've got chronic illness, so pain management is really important to me. And I know that a lot of neurodivergent people do have comorbidities around chronic illness. My psychiatrist was saying that there are links between ME, fibromyalgia and autism. Emerging links, the data is not conclusive yet, but that's how it's looking. So having a standing desk is going to help you, especially if it's an electronic one, and because you can get those ones where you wind it up, but no. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but when you're putting labels in, put them in a place that is not going to bother you. So as I said, I can't have them on the back of my neck. I wouldn't even like them down the side. You might even want to put them on the outside of your garment. That's another option. So this one's a really, really good idea, and it's something that someone in the group came up with, and they said incorporate your special interests into your sewing. So if you're into Star Wars or Harry Potter or whatever it is, for me it's lions. I love watching lion videos. I'm completely obsessed with them. I could have fabric with lions on it, or I could make safari clothes, or whatever, you know. Whatever your special interests are, incorporate that into your sewing, because then you're going to enjoy your sewing a lot more. So that is all I've got for you today. Hit subscribe. If you would like to support my channel a bit more, then do consider purchasing a coffee for me. That is going to be really helpful. I am now one income, so I've got to ramp up these videos. But the link will be down below. And also the link to my autism journey post will be down below as well. So do check that out. I'll put it right here as well. So thanks for watching right to the end. I will see you in the very next one. Bye for now.